All right, I think we are good to go. So good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome back. My name is Charlene. I know that in the program calendar, it says that Brianne would be presenting today, but she is out today, so it is myself. I am one of the client services coordinators. I'm located in the Edmonton office, but we are presenting across Alberta and into the Northwest Territory. So today is the very first of our Wednesday webinars. And I just, a couple things, housekeeping sort of rules. If you have any questions during this webinar, we would encourage you to submit them in the chat below. At the bottom of your screen, there is a chat icon. Click on it, the chat will appear, you can type in your question, and then the questions will be sent to the whole group. My co-worker, Brett, is on the presentation with me, so he will be monitoring the chat. I will try my best to take a little bit of a break during the middle of the presentation and address any questions. If there is things that we don't get the opportunity to talk about today during this webinar, please know that we will keep all of those questions. And you are always welcome to contact any one of us at Client Services by calling the toll-free line 1-800-561-1911. There are 3 of the client services coordinators in the Edmonton office, plus our boss, and then Brett is in Calgary and Brianne is in the Lethbridge office. But we work for all of the people in Alberta and the Northwest Territory, so you're welcome to connect with any one of us. So today, just so you know, this webinar is being recorded. All of this information provided in the video by the Parkinson Association and the featured speaker, which is myself, is furnished strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. This service is not intended to be diagnostic, prescriptive, or replace the relationship, advice, and/or care of your physician. General questions about symptoms, treatment, available medications, complementary and alternative health or care therapies, and current research can be fielded, but we don't necessarily will get the opportunity to answer all of those questions today. So without further ado, let's start today's webinar, which is entitled Connecting Hearts, Dating and Relationships. And again, this presentation was created by Brianne, so I'm presenting her work. So, as we know, relationships and Parkinson's, both of those things can be quite complicated. So today we'll discuss the practical aspects and insights to help individuals navigate the challenges of maintaining connections, making new connections, forging healthy relationships, all while dealing with Parkinson's disease. I think this is a very important quote. The most important things in life aren't necessarily things. And I have to say, having just been through the holiday season, I have 4 grandchildren, but one of them came across saying, I didn't get very much stuff for Christmas. And I said, well, stuff is one thing, but think of all the things that we did together, all the fun that we had, and all of the memories that we made. And part of that were not things. Those were things that took place, but different than actual, tangible, tactable sorts of things. This is information that when I very first read this, I was a little bit shocked, because when you think about social isolation, sometimes we think about people that don't necessarily get out or don't have any social connections. So we think of people who don't have any family, or people who don't have a home, or those types of people that might be isolated. What I found was, when I read this, people over the age of 15, which could be anyone other than those small children, 1 in 10 of those people often say that they're feeling lonely. And that can be a challenge, because we don't often think of ourselves as being lonely, even though we have lots of people in our life or we have certain connections. But it's looking at whether or not those sorts of things have an impact on how we view our everyday life. Often people who don't have social connections do find that there is the potential for them to have a less healthy lifestyle. They don't necessarily have as good a health, and as we age, the chances of us having more social isolation related to other medical conditions or possibly that chronic condition of Parkinson's, our risk of being socially isolated goes higher. We also know, and there is good research evidence that shows that people that are socially connected tend to do better than people that are not socially connected. And one of the things we try to do here at Parkinson Association is try to connect you socially through support groups or through our socials that we have on a regular basis. The other thing that I found was really interesting is that they say if you are someone who doesn't have those social connections, you are at a higher risk of falling. You're at a higher risk of developing some cognitive impairment. There is lots of research evidence in that area right now. So again, this is a good reminder that being socially connected is good for your physical health, as well as your mental health, as well as your cognitive health. So why are connections important? And I think I've given you a little bit of information previously, but we're going to kind of delve into this a little bit more so in that emotional support. So knowing that you have someone that you can connect with. So if you're having one of those days where it's just not the greatest day, then it is okay to reach out to someone to say, I'm not having a great day. You have that emotional connection, but then also that helps with your overall well-being. The physical and the mental well-being, when you're connected with someone, there is the possibility that that is going to release some endorphins, which potentially would help you feel a little better. I think it's interesting that they say that social connections help boost our mood. I don't think there's a person out there that would say, oh, that was great, we laughed and laughed, and then we felt terrible. Most of us, if we've laughed and laughed, we'll know that we feel a little bit better, or if there's that bond. And sometimes, as this picture illustrates, that simple touch, sometimes touch can have more of an impact than people realize. And it is a known fact that holding hands from when we're tiny, tiny babies until we're old, that human contact makes a world of difference. They say that children, as they age, if they haven't had human contact, don't do as well. They have less social connections. They have less intimate connections. So that actual physical human touch of simply just holding a hand with someone has more of an impact than we really realize. The other thing that I think is really important is when we have those connections, if there is something that happens, be it a catastrophe or something that is just not in our what we would call regular everyday life, if you have that human connection, it's knowing that you can rely on that person in those difficult situations, because if you are going through some of those things, it is much easier to have someone to connect with, and that connection potentially would be someone that you have developed quite a deep relationship with. So talking about relationships, let's talk a little bit about social circles and the importance that they play in our life, and what does a social circle look like? So if we start in the very center of that circle would be you as an individual. Now, this could be the person living with Parkinson's, this can be their care partner, this could be a child, this could be an adult. This is you as an individual. And around that, what we would consider to be more of the closer or intimate relationships are our family connections. So that could be your spouse, that could be your child, that could be your grandchild, that could be your aunt, your uncle, who we classify as our family connections. Around that one are some more of our potential relatives. So it could be aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews. It also could be people that we have developed deep relationships with that we call family. So for example, my husband's best friend, my children called him Uncle Rob because he was quite an intimate part of our family. And so I would classify him to be part of that more inner circle. So he wasn't a blood relative of ours, but we classified him as being part of our family. Then from there, our social circle is getting a little bigger. These potentially could be people that you see regularly. So it might be people that you see at an exercise group that you go to, people that are part of your worship community. It could be people that you see on a regular basis at a Parkinson support group. It could be people that you do a club activity with. So that's, again, another social circle that you have that's surrounding your inner circle. From there, we develop another social circle, which could be what we classify as our community and our professional circle. So this could be, again, people that you see on a regular basis, such as maybe it's your hairdresser or your barber. You tend to see them on a regular basis. If you're someone who gets your hair cut, if you're bald, like other people that I know, you might not see that person as often. But it also could be community partners such as your pharmacist. It could be your general practitioner doctor. Although as a nurse, I would hope that I was closer to your inner circle than being way out on the outside. But that's just me being biased as a nurse. And then on the outside of our circle is another social circle, which is classified as strangers, but this could be people that potentially you meet standing in the grocery store lineup, or someone that you see routinely at the dog park and you talk to, but it's not someone that you know intimately. So all of these connections or all of these circles are people that develop connections with you and have relationships with you. So what matters the most are the types of relationships that we have. And often people say that family relationship is the best. That is for some people, but not everybody has that intimate family relationship. It could be that their partner is their most significant person, but it isn't necessarily their family at that point. So it's looking at what the types of relationships that you have. So those friendship relationships are based mostly on people that you spend with, but they're not necessarily blood relatives. They're non-family members, but you associate with them on a regular basis by doing activities that are very similar and things that are of interest to both of you. Those romantic relationships could be your spouse. It could be a significant other. It could be a partner. It could be a care partner. It could be anyone or all of those. And then those friendship relationships, again, are things that people often have in common, and that's what's brought them together, and that's what continues to keep them with their bond, because they're doing something that they enjoy together. So also, when we think about those casual acquaintances, and those could be people that we have had relationships with because we were doing something of interest, but then maybe that group is no longer getting together, but you happen to run into that person at the grocery store, or you happen to run into them when you're out for dinner one night. So those are people that you have connected with, you may continue to connect with, but you're not seeing on a regular basis. The community helpers, again, people that you interact with on a regular basis, but aren't necessarily those people that you have a blood relationship with, but they're people that you connect with on a regular basis, so you've developed a relationship with them. And you sometimes get to know when they're having a good day, and you may see them on a regular basis, so you might notice that they've changed their hair color, or they've, lost a little weight, and those sorts of things. So it's a relationship and a connection that does have an impact on how overall your well-being is. Strangers don't have quite that same intimate connection, but again, they're people that if they happen to say hello to you in the grocery store, you're not going to ignore them, but it's not someone that has that initial physical or spiritual connection with you. Many things can impact a relationship and the connections, and it's not just Parkinson's. But what we do know is that sometimes Parkinson's can make the relationship or have an impact on the relationship and the connection. And so these sorts of things can be a challenge. And so we're going to talk about them a little more in depth on the following slides. But what we do notice that sometimes because of Parkinson's, there can be physical challenges, there can be some emotional challenges, there can be some communication types of challenges, and this can all have an impact on relationships and sometimes make those things a little more challenging. So let's start with the physical challenges. So when we think about physical challenges, sometimes we think about, pardon me, the impact that it has on our physical well-being. So this might be related to our ability to drive, our ability to get out of bed, our ability to do those things that bring us pleasure and joy, such as exercise, some of our hobbies, such as golfing. Some of those potential things may be a little more challenging because Parkinson's has caused some of those physical things to change, and it's not as easy for us to do it. It puts us at a higher risk sometimes because of our balance. Sometimes those fine motor skills, so things that you wanted to be able to do, such as knitting or construction sorts of things, or anything to do with tools, those things are much more challenging because those fine motor skills are impacted, which can potentially make it a physical challenge. We do notice too that sometimes changes in our ability to do certain things make it more difficult. So sometimes sexual intimacy can be a more challenging thing. When we think about sometimes the stiffness and the slowness, that physical challenge of being able to create arousal, those sorts of things can be more difficult. That can cause sometimes a challenge in the intimacy part of our relationship. So then it's looking at, how can we do things, but potentially in a little different fashion? Or is there something that we maybe haven't tried that maybe we're willing to try? Because it's not that we can't be intimate, it's just that we have to look at, is there a different way that we can do it? That's potentially a conversation that sometimes can be hard for people, but important that we have those types of conversations, because sometimes one person is thinking one thing, one person is thinking another thing, but neither of you are communicating about it. So it may not necessarily all be about intimacy. It could be about, I want to go out to eat, but you don't want to go because you can't get in and out of the car as easily as you could before. I want to go to the golf course and continue golfing, but you don't want to do that because you think you're not as able to do. So having conversations about those sorts of things, and potentially, is it related to physical challenges? The other thing that goes along with that is it an activity that you are continuing to do because you want to do it together and you want to stay connected because of that? Or is it something that, oh, we don't have to do this anymore because we're not able to do this anymore? Sometimes it's having that type of conversation. And it's not easy sometimes, because one person might think that, oh, they don't want to do it because I'm not able to do it. As I've said, sometimes it needs to be explored in that things can be done in a different fashion. Sometimes doing things the same way all the time leads to that rut. And so sometimes we have to explore, is there potentially something else that we can do that may make this a little bit easier? When we look at the communication challenges, sometimes, and we know with Parkinson's that ability to communicate sometimes can become more challenging. The voice projection is different. The facial expression is different. Sometimes the person with Parkinson's is very, very interested, but their expression is not showing that. And so as the person in the relationship, you're not quite sure. We're like, well, they look like they're totally bored, but they haven't said anything. So sometimes, again, opening those lines of communication and having that conversation about, is this what you're thinking, or is this what I'm seeing? Because that's not what I'm seeing. So those sorts of things are really important. Also, sometimes people with Parkinson's, getting the actual words out, that slowness of speech, as someone that works with them, sometimes I have the habit of, oh, I know exactly what they're saying, but they haven't said it yet, so I haven't let them finish their sentence. I do that. I think there's other people that do that too. So it's being mindful that allowing them to finish those sentences and maybe asking questions so that they don't have to have a long conversation, but are able to answer it with a yes and no. Sometimes that is a little more applicable because it will be able to move the conversation the way that you're looking at it. And sometimes yes and no questions are okay, rather than having them have to make a lengthy explanation. Sometimes for people with Parkinson's, being in that large group can be intimidating and overwhelming because that's not something that they're wanting to present themselves that way. And that sort of thing can be difficult also. So again, being mindful of the conversation and how the conversation is taking place, I think is really important. Looking at, are there ways that you can open up the conversation or have that conversation and not necessarily make it so that it is overwhelming? For people with Parkinson's, sometimes having that conversation when your medications are working the best is not a bad thing, because then you are able to speak the way you want to speak and project your voice the way you want to project. So those sorts of things when it comes to communication are super important. When we think about the cognitive aspect of it, sometimes it's understanding that, again, the slowness of thought can have an impact on that overall well-being. And so that can be a challenge too. Emotionally, some of these things can be difficult. Now, we talk about emotions, and there seems to be a little bit of a discrepancy between apathy and depression. Sometimes people think that that's the exact same thing, but it is not. Apathy is that lack of ability to get going. So it's kind of that lack of motivation. The depression is the not wanting to do it at all and withdrawing. So they are two different sorts of things. The challenge comes that sometimes people with Parkinson's can have apathy and depression and be less motivated and be a little anxious, or they could have none of those things. So it's looking at, how can we manage those types of challenges, which can be difficult. And it's not just people with Parkinson's. All facets of people can have all of those types of emotional challenges. So being mindful that with Parkinson's, there is a higher likelihood of developing these emotional sorts of challenges. So how can we help to be motivating with someone who doesn't want to be motivated? That's $1 million question, but we try our best. Looking at, are there things that we've lost interest in that potentially we could help to spark that interest again? Is it something that I just don't feel like I want to do this today? But then looking at, is there a reason why you're feeling that way? Is there potentially something that's causing that? Communication is really important when it comes to talking about feelings and those sorts of things. So overall, our impact, our self-image, all of those things are impacted by relationships. Often, oops. Let's go back here. Oop, there we go. Sorry. Often what we notice is that people with Parkinson's, because they're not able to project their voice, because they're not able to sometimes present themselves like they want to, they tend to withdraw. Withdrawing can be a challenge because, again, when your voice is not what it used to be, when your expression is not what it used to be, then sometimes it's harder to get yourself out there or put yourself out there. Projecting our self-image is something that does take some work for people with Parkinson's. And I have to say kudos to our care partners. They do the best they can by helping the person that's with them, to keep them motivated, to help them to feel connected. It's often a challenge with our mood, because sometimes our mood can have an overall impact on what we want to do. And if we're feeling down and not wanting to do anything, that has an overall it kind of decides whether or not we want to be engaged with people and how we want to do things. So it is a challenge, and it is something that we have to look at when it comes to connecting with people and our relationships. So again, some of those relationship challenges, we've talked about the cognitive sorts of things, but looking at whether or not we can maintain those communications, feeling that we're fulfilled and feeling like our relationship is overall okay, sometimes can be frustrating too, because it not going the way we anticipated it was going to go, or things are changing and they're different, and what do we do and how do we manage all of this? And there is no manual, there is no how-to book. It's one of those things that we have to work on, but also sometimes we need a little help with those sorts of things, and that's okay. So asking for help is not a bad thing. It's one of those things that we look at and go, maybe there is someone that might have a little bit of experience with this, or someone that would be able to help us with this. So sometimes it's okay to ask for that assistance. And we know that in certain relationships, there are roles that have specific relationships, such as a parent and a child, or a friend and another friend. And sometimes those relationships have specific things that you have to do, and sometimes those things are shared. Again, communication is so important. Being able to talk it over or talk it through, or at least start the conversation, is really, really important too. The other thing that I think is really important is knowing when it's okay to say yes and knowing when it's okay to say no. Sometimes we think the more that we do, the more involved we are, the more connected we'll be, the better that will be. But sometimes we can get over involved and overstimulated, and then we become overwhelmed. Not just with that one relationship, but with a combination of all of those relationships. So all of those things are very, very important. Sometimes we have to set some boundaries, and that can be difficult for someone who has always been a doer. I just want to do everything. But then when you have to say, I can't do everything, then you feel like you're letting yourself down, or you're letting that person down. That's important. You need to think about what you are able to do and how much you can devote time to that relationship, as well as the million other things that are in your social circle. Sometimes we need to start a new relationship. And how do we do that? And it doesn't have to be an intimate relationship, but it could be an intimate relationship. And so the first thing that we do when we start a basic relationship is we put ourselves out there and we introduce ourselves and say hello. And that can start a connection or a social circle with some, what we would call friends. And sometimes by putting ourselves out there and making that connection, that relationship builds over time and it becomes a much more connected relationship or a close relationship. But when is it time to tell that person that you have Parkinson's if it's a new relationship? Do you have to tell that person that you have Parkinson's? That's something that has been brought up a couple of times. And so I think it's very individual, in the sense that if you wait too long, does that mean that you're withholding information? Or if you divulge that information right away, does that mean that that person has the ability to back off right away? That's a great question. Sometimes it's the courage to put yourself out there, which is really important, but it also makes you very vulnerable. So if it's a dating relationship, that's something that is very different than a friendship type of relationship, where you just want to get to know the person in your exercise class. So if that person asks questions, is it okay to bring up or divulge that information? I think that's up to you. Most people will know when they're able to say things and when they want to not share all of that information. I think one of the important things is knowing yourself and knowing what you want out of this relationship. And that too takes a connection, that takes that conversation, that is important that you're able to put into words all of those things that you want to say. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time. It's not something that can be done overnight. With looking for companionship, it's, do you want someone that you can enjoy spending time with, or are you looking for a long-term partner? I think those sorts of things are important too, because we have to look at where or what angle are you coming at this from? And if it's something that you're looking for, I don't think the dating websites are the best places to go, because sometimes you don't get a true picture of the person. So I think that face-to-face interaction is not a bad thing. And I think that's how we get to know whether or not a dating relationship is something that we're looking for. So where do we go to find new connections? As I said, it might have been that exercise class that you had joined. Sometimes what we find is, if you're looking for a new relationship, is it something that is of common interest to both of you? Do you both enjoy going to the car show? Do you both enjoy going to movies? Do you both enjoy going out for dinner? It's finding that commonality, because sometimes common interests or commonalities are things that people are quite passionate about, and that can lead to forming a great connection. Sometimes people find that those common interests of going to a worship service, because that's something that you both are quite passionate about, that can build a great connection for people. Sometimes finding that connection of people that are in a similar situation, such as our Parkinson support group. So the people with Parkinson's and their care partners find that that's a common space, and there is commonality amongst all of those people, as well as our care partner group, strictly for care partners, is a commonality also, because that is a similar situation that people are going through, and they feel a strong connection because people often know what they're going through or have experienced similar experiences. So it's a good way to form a connection. We know that sometimes with our seniors, it can be difficult because there are lots and lots of things, and it's looking for what is the thing that will be of interest to you. So I always say, start with your own interests and then kind of build from there. But if there's something that you've been interested in that you don't know a lot about, that sometimes is a good way to form a connection with people too, because then you get to learn about what you're wanting to know about, maybe from someone who has more experience or more knowledge about it. The other thing that we notice is that when people get involved in similar sorts of things, that they routinely get to see each other, and then you establish those bonds and those connections, and they're quite unique. And it's because you're in a similar situation and in a similar environment with sorts of things that you find are helpful. We do find that, and I did mention a little bit about the dating thing, but sometimes the virtual platform such as this, so a Zoom connection with people, is okay, because during COVID, if anything, it taught us that it's okay to not be in the same place as other people, but to still connect with people. So a Zoom connection sometimes may alleviate that isolation feeling, because you're still connecting with people even though they're physically not in the same room as you. So I did allude to this a little bit about, it can be intimidating to tell people about your diagnosis. You might task yourself with the time that is right of when you tell people that you have Parkinson's. Every relationship is very different. And when you share that information, it will depend on how you feel in that relationship. And you might want to consider, not everybody needs to know. Not everybody is going to care. But if you feel that it is really, really important, then that's something that you can think about sharing with that person. It does take some time to establish a trust relationship with people. And I think the important thing is that giving information to someone about a medical diagnosis, sometimes that information is received okay, and sometimes it's not. And so it's thinking about how that might be and what sorts of things or what type of information would be helpful and what might not be helpful. So I think it's important to be truthful. I think it's important that you have all the information that you know or that you need. But then if that person has other questions, where can you find the answers to those questions? If you don't know them yourself, you can direct them to a reliable source, such as us at Parkinson Association, or sometimes finding that information together is not a bad thing as long as you're at a reputable place. So the internet does not give you all the information. It gives you some information, but we caution you that it's not always the best information. So again, not everyone in your social circle needs to know your information about your diagnosis. When you feel it's time, you might be able to share that information with them, but there should be, as every relationship should be, have a mutual understanding and a trust in it. That information is your information. So when you share it, you're quite vulnerable about that. But it's one of those things that you decide when it's important. And we do move in and out of those social circles. So you might have people in your community group that you've grown quite close to, that if you move out of that community, that's still part of your social circle, but it might be that you're forming a new community group with a new group of people if you're in a new community. The other thing that we find is that sometimes people that have been acquaintances, we've known them for much longer, and then something happens and it brings you closer together, so then they feel more like family. So we move in and out of those social circles at all times of our life and throughout this whole diagnosis that we have of Parkinson's. The important things come in life. The most important things in life are the connections we make with others. And I think this is really important. And I love this picture at the top of these ladies dancing, because I think it's important that we have those connections, and the connections don't have to be just with our partner or our spouse. It can be connections that we have with family. It can be connections that we have with friends. It can be connections that we have with people that have common interests with us. And I think the really important thing is that we have connections. As I said in the very beginning, social isolation for people with Parkinson's is a huge challenge. So if we can encourage you to be connected in any way, be it doing something with your spouse or your significant other or your partner that allows you to feel connected together. It could be a common interest. It could be something that you want to try together. It could be something that you've done the same way all the time that now you're going to try a little bit different, and that's okay. But I think the important thing is forming those connections with lots of people. And because the research evidence shows us the more connected we are, the better impact it has on our cognitive ability. And we know people with Parkinson's can have that as the disease progresses. There can be some changes. So social connections are super, super important. So I'm going to encourage you to be connected socially. So in closing, we know relationships take time, they take respect, and they take trust. They are constructed through shared experiences, mutual understanding, requiring a commitment to each other's well-being. Like a delicate tapestry, the threads of time weave a bond that deepens with respect and is strengthened by trust. In essence, relationships are a journey where the investment of time, the cultivation of respect, and the building of trust form the sturdy pillars that support lasting connections. And Dr. Seuss is very, very wise. He says, "The people that mind don't matter, and the people that matter don't mind."